This video will provide you with a quick introduction on how to use CIRIS to record activity and emissions data for waste sources. The waste sector is used to record activity and emissions data from solid waste and wastewater that is disposed of and/or treated at a facility inside the city boundary or transported to other cities for treatment. This sheet for the waste sector contains 4 tables, following the GPC guidelines, which are solid waste disposal, biological treatment of waste, incineration and open burning, and wastewater treatment and discharge. The waste sector differs slightly in the reporting requirements and definition of scopes from the other sectors. Any waste generated by the city but treated outside of the boundary, classified as Scope 3, must be reported as part of a basic inventory in addition to waste generated and treated inside the boundary, the Scope 1 waste. So in these tables, both Scope 1 and 3 are shown in green. Scope 2 emissions are not found in the waste sector, as this includes only grid supplier electricity, heat or cooling, and the emissions reported in the waste sector are only those related to the decomposition process, not the energy inputs. In addition, any waste that is generated outside the city boundary and treated inside the city boundary is also reported as Scope 1, but this forms part of the territorial inventory and is not part of the city's total emissions, so is reported on a separate line shown in purple. For more information on reporting emissions from the waste sector, see Chapter 8 of the GPC and Part 2 of the CIRIS User Guide. So, let's quickly go through the process of adding a row to the incineration and open burning table in this sheet to report incineration of clinical waste from hospitals. As we have seen in other videos, we must add a row using the Add button at the side of the table for Scope 1 waste, generated and treated within the boundary. We can see in this table that we have 3 columns under GHG emissions source that allow us to provide information about the activity. Starting with the treatment activity, we will select Waste Incineration 4.C.2, and then under Type of Waste, we will select Other, Please Specify, as there is no clinical waste option. We can then use the description column to add some further details. Now that we can enter the data, we will enter 300 in amount and tons in unit. All 3 gases are generated from incineration, so we will select CO2, CH4, NO2, and then select the emissions factor. In the list, we have a pre-loaded emission factor called EF_clinical waste_incineration, which we can then use to automatically calculate emissions. If we check, we can see that our emission factor unit and activity data units are both tons, so we don't need to do any conversion of units. If you do need to convert units, the stationary energy video explains how to do this. If we need to, we can add emissions data manually to the table. This is sometimes more appropriate where complex calculations have been undertaken that do not fit into CIRIS so easily, or third-party tools have been used to calculate total emissions. Landfill emissions, reported in 3.1, are often easier to report directly as total emissions. In this instance, we can add the data directly in the pink columns, making sure we select the tick in the emissions data column. The grey columns then calculate the total emissions. Lastly, as with the previous videos, we add our data quality assessment and description of method, and then select the data source. You can see from the drop-down list we have the source Waste Management in Buenos Aires, a study, which we will select as our data source. We can then add a comment on data quality if we wish. Now that we've finished adding this row, simply repeat this process to add data to the remaining tables for the different activities. Note that the options available to select under the Treatment Activities column varies in each table, as they are specific to the types of waste and treatment methods. As we saw in the previous videos, where we don't have any activities to report or cannot report them, we must use a notation key. In the waste sector, it is quite common to have no waste generated outside the city and treated inside the city, so for these purple rows we can add NO for not occurring. Remember that for a basic inventory, cities need to report all GHG emissions from disposal or treatment of waste generated within the city boundary, whether treated inside or outside the city boundary. Emissions from waste imported from outside the city but treated inside the city must also be reported, but are excluded from Basic and Basic Plus totals. Also remember that where waste is burned for energy, it must be reported in the energy sector.